the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George. And let's just bask in the glowing, basking glow of this Cotton Bowl victory. The second,
it felt so good.
Yeah, the second SEC victory that Ohio State's had in this playoff, the third victory overall. You get new hats and shirts for a bowl victory. Obviously, it's not the big win. Real quick, I have a couple things I want to point out before we get into the whole spiel. What we're going to do is we're going to break down the Cotton Bowl a little bit by some of its major events. I was thinking about two things unrelated to anything else about this. First of all, did you see the Cotton Bowl trophy?
No,
what the hell are they trying to compensate for? This thing,
just real quick, because I was working the game this weekend. As soon as Jack Sawyer scored that touchdown, I was like, okay, I got to go write that up, and then I got the post game press.
Right,
I had no time.
You couldn't even enjoy it. You just had
to I couldn't.
Let's go.
I was very happy in the moment watching it happen. And then as soon as he was in the end zone, it's like, okay, I'm going to go have a bunch of stuff I got to do. So I don't even have any time to process or enjoy this.
That's right. You turn into like some like tech guy on NCIS and you're just like trying to get as many screenshots.
Exactly. And like they went, and the losers, Texas, went right into the post game press conference. So while they're doing all the podium stuff, I miss all of that because I'm trying to listen to what Ewers has to say about the fact that his roommate just clowned him, or his old roommate. And then I got to get Sark's comments too. And if he, puts his foot in his mouth, I'm going to want to get that out as quickly as possible. But I had never actually listened to him speak at length. He was very courteous, and even Ohio State fans didn't have anything wrong to say. So I didn't see the trophy or really any of the post-game celebration, but sorry to cut you off. Please
it's
continue
fine.
with your trophy observations.
I was enjoying, I had to do stuff after the game, but a little bit later on, right? Like I don't have to write in the immediacy of it. Like I'm just collecting tweets at that point. But I'm watching
Social Reacts has been crushing it the last couple weeks, by the way.
It is really funny to me because Social Reactions, like we came up with that post as this is not anything anybody's interested in, but we came up as like okay, let's do a little add-on, right? Like after games, I'll get some tweets and I'll write 100 words. It's the most popular freaking post. It drives it. I think it is so hilarious. And there were people in the comments like, this is the first thing I check out. And I'm like, that's unfortunate because I spent about 5 minutes writing. So please make sure you check out our other content that George and Andy and Dan and everyone else on the site spends a lot of time working on. They do a great job. It's not all about the tweets. But yeah, this trophy is enormous. It's the size of a small child, and it looks like something that they would use as a prop in Star Trek. It's like completely out of place for a college football trophy. Maybe that's just me as a Big Ten fan, where I assume all trophies should either be like, a Paul Bunyan statue or some kind of like receptacle for tobacco juice. Like it's, like we tend to have very ridiculous trophies in the Big Ten, and this is like some spaceship thing that people are holding up. So I thought, I always
conceptualize like if they had a trophy for this bowl, and we never really had to pay attention to it because the Big Ten would never go to it before this new modern era where any team can go to any bowl basically any given year. But if I were to imagine it, I always just imagined like a spin-off of the Orange Bowl trophy, but instead of oranges, it's a bowl of a bunch of little balls of cotton. But practically, it's like anytime you would lift that up, they'd like float out and like fall out easier than the oranges. And it's not like the Orange Bowl where the players are like throwing the oranges to themselves in the crowd after they. It's like you can't.
They're
throw
like
the cotton.
Yeah, that's
not
fun.
Fun.
No. Yeah. I really encourage people to look up this ridiculous trophy that they have for the Cotton Bowl. It makes no sense. It's just, like I said, it looks like a spaceship. It's stupid.
What do they call those big wheels for spinning cotton? Back in the day,
gin.
Gin? That's what we need. We need a big, like,
I feel like that
brass metal cotton gin,
especially for a game played in the South that might stir up some echoes of some memories that the
maybe
South prefers
but
to
then
ignore.
But maybe we just need to rebrand the entire bowl then to begin
I'd be
with.
fine with that.
Me too.
Something like the Brisket Bowl, or like, I don't know. Dallas hasn't really known anything except for urban sprawl, but like, I don't know. Maybe call it like the Cactus Bowl.
Yeah, go all in or all out. It's 2025. Come on.
There you go. So that was the first thing that I noticed. I was like, what the hell is this thing? And then the second thing was, after these victories, what I have been doing, and it's probably a bad habit, something I probably shouldn't do as a normal human being. But I just kind of revel in the Schadenfreude after this. Like I'm like frantically looking through all the the Texas message boards and the Oregon message boards, and I'm just like, yes, I want to see their misery. And first of all, real quick, the Texas football team, Sark, Ewers, even most of their fans, honestly, that I see online, super chill, super complimentary. I didn't see really anything crazy at all.
So you were disappointed then?
I was a little
You didn't get to
disappointed.
lap up their tears like you were
I thought
expecting.
they were going to be like huge, crazy jerks, but no, they weren't. They were like, again, almost every.
They haven't been in the SEC that long.
That's right. They haven't adapted to the culture. But one thing that I thought was really interesting, and I was like, maybe this applies to the rest of these Southern teams. They seemed genuinely surprised at several things that Ohio State was doing, including like Will Howard, for example, like being an accurate passer. And part of that was Texas has played Will Howard, 3 times prior to this. And Will Howard hadn't, I think his average, I actually did the calculation on this. His completion percentage prior to coming to Ohio State was like 57%, right? And now it's like 74%. He's one of the most accurate passers in the country. And that's not entirely because of who he's throwing to. He's developed as a passer enormously during the season.
And the fact that the Texas fans were blown away by that relative to the first 4 times they played really speaks to the development Ryan Day has put onto him in just one season.
But also, they seemed really like confused, like not confused, but they didn't know who most of the players in Ohio State were, at least from what I saw.
And I think they knew who Jeremiah Smith was.
Well, they knew Jeremiah Smith was because he's like the number, and they knew who Caleb Downs was because he played at Alabama. But one of the things that I thought about, I'm like, do Southern college football fans, do they watch football outside of Southern football? And I thought about this because a lot of Southern football is played at like 3:30 at night, right? Like they don't play a lot of noon football games. And so I honestly think the average, Texan, Alabama, Georgian, whatever, they start watching college football when their team starts playing, and then they'll watch it through the rest of the day. But we start at like, 12 o'clock because Ohio State played a trillion noon games. You know what I'm saying? So my point is that I think maybe their familiarity with Ohio State was not as much as it normally would be. And they say a lot of these fans, a lot of the commentators online seem genuinely surprised that, Cody Simon, for example, is just a freaking wrecking ball, right? Like they didn't know who the hell Cody Simon was, like Lathan Ransom, who's for my money, I think he's a top 5, top 10 safety in the country. They didn't know who the hell he was. They're like, who's this guy like blowing dudes up? And I just thought that was really interesting because, for Ohio State, obviously Quinn Ewers is like front and, foremost in our minds about when we think about Texas players. But I feel like there was more familiarity from the Ohio State side of Texas than vice versa. And I don't know. I'm not saying it like really had an impact at all on the teams or anything like that, but it was just an interesting kind of observation that I saw after that.
I mean, I would have struggled to name 5 players on Texas before last week, to be fair.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it kind of goes both ways. I had watched Texas maybe a couple times this season. I think I watched their first game that they played against Georgia because I vividly remember their fans throwing trash onto the field.
Of course.
But I hadn't really watched them in any extended capacity or anything. And there's a lot of moving. I think this sport is a lot more fun to watch as a fan of it. When you're going beyond just the team that you support, it's better to really watch a different assortment of teams almost every week than it is to just own in on like the good teams.
I think so.
You're selling yourself short on the experience if you are really only watching top 25 teams or teams from one conference every week. So I don't necessarily agree that I think Texas fans were ignorant to who Ohio State was going into this. And I don't think that they're necessarily sleeping in on the early window relative to when Texas or the teams closer to the western edge of the central time zone or the eastern edge of the mountain time zone would actually be playing, especially because I don't know about you, when Ohio State plays at like 3, on the rare occasion that Ohio State isn't playing at noon anymore,
when they're not like forced to play, get up at
when
9
I'm trying, when I'm like, come on, how do I kill these last 3 hours, man, before Ohio State plays? I'll put on a noon game, and normally they've got some other Big Ten like a lot of times my go-to is like, because it's like know thy enemy. Michigan a lot of times is playing in the noon time slot when Ohio State is at 3:30, and I'll just end up watching the Michigan game just to get a sense of like what am I going to have to look out for at the end of November. But I'm usually watching a noon game to kill time before unless I have something better to do on a Saturday. I'll usually be doing that before I watch Ohio State later on in the day, whether they're in the late afternoon window or the evening window. So I feel like most people that regularly watch the sport do the same thing. So I don't necessarily think that they were any more ignorant to who Ohio State was any more than any other team would.
Well, if they were, even if they were, they surely know who a lot of these guys are now, because I think large parts of the game were very stagnant because you had these two incredible defenses that were just slant. Like, I mean, it was, if I were more versed in defensive football, I think I probably would have enjoyed that aspect more of it. Unfortunately, I feel like I'm a little more ignorant of that side of the ball than the offensive side of the ball. So that's something I want to learn more about, because I feel like you had two elite defenses that were doing everything they could to scheme away what the other team was best at. And you saw at one point there was like, these teams traded punts 9 times in a row at one point in the first half because they could not figure out a way to get around the opposing defense. And so that's something we're going to talk about. But I like I said, I want to go through some of these larger, just the big points, the major points. The first series was great. Ohio State, they had their script, they had their pre-planned, plays that they were going to run. They all worked very well. They go down, they immediately score a touchdown. And I think a lot of people were thinking like, here we go. And especially when Texas, with Sarkisian, everybody's like, oh crap, this is a guy, he's the master of planning. He'll have the script. They were talking about it on the ESPN broadcast. They were like, the script, he's got the legendary script. And then of course it didn't really go anywhere. And they're like, oh crap. Okay. Well then Ohio State's going to come out and boat race these guys. I was not nearly as confident as I think maybe some people might have been, but they counterpunch. Texas gets back into it. They roll down the field, and there was I think it was part of Quinn Ewers. Not like a lot of people were kind of ragging on him, in the after the Arizona State game that they played. But he's a very good quarterback, and you knew he was going to get his at some point. So I don't know. How did you feel? I guess my question to you then is, George, how did you feel at the beginning of the game? Like, did you feel that it was going to be a 4-quarter fight, or after that first touchdown, were you feeling like pretty optimistic?
I thought they were going to have another fast start like they did in the first 2 games that was going to result in another 3-score win. Right. So when the game started with them scoring, I thought, okay, here we go. This is pretty much what I thought was going to happen. And, for the most part, in the early stages of the game, I mean, it's easy to look back and say that the teams were stopping each other, but the truth is, I mean, Ohio State could have really done more damage in the first half than they ended up doing. They had so many self-inflicted penalties and mistakes,
false starts
that took them out of not just false start. Fouls. The first big one was Travion Henderson. I saw a lot of people saying that he got hit in the groin on his way up.
I didn't see that.
And that was because Travion Henderson, the guy that is answering almost every question the media gives him with like a Bible verse or something. You think that guy's just going to punch somebody in the face unwarranted?
I don't think so.
So they were saying the replays didn't really do a good job of showing it during the game, but there were after further review, way after the fact, there were a lot of people that were saying that he got hit in the groin while he was standing up.
Yeah,
and
people had to review the crotch cam, and then they
right. But as common thought in sports in general, it's always the retaliator that gets seen and penalized rather than the instigator. So Travion ends up, putting out a drive-killing personal foul. I know there are a lot of people complaining that, it was two different whistles relative to holding during the game that, killed some other Ohio State drives for them. So it was, I felt like they could have done a lot more damage in the first half than they ended up doing because they just killed themselves on so many drives with these penalties. And I think they had 9 penalties for 75 yards by the end of the game, which I would imagine would have to be close to, if not the most they've had in any game this season.
The other thing is Jeremiah Smith. I mean, it wasn't a great ball. It was a tough catch, but he let one go through his hands near the goal line. Mecca Buka had one literally go. I mean, it was like he had his hands up and it just went, and he wasn't able to pull that one in. And both of those, attempted catches in double covers, they were not easy catches to make. But if you make even one of those, I think it changes the entire tenor of the game. So, I do think that they took their shots early. Some people were kind of critical of the play calling. I'll be honest. I think that's underselling a little bit of what Texas is defensively. They have an excellent secondary. They have the Thorpe Award winner, right? Like at corner. They have the freshman of the year at linebacker who is unbelievably good in coverage. Their safeties are excellent. The thing is they were playing too high a lot of the time. And then what they were doing with the linebackers is that they were playing super close to the line of scrimmage. So when you've got a defensive line that is as good as they have, linebackers can kind of do whatever they want. It was really hard to get anything going on the ground. It's hard to do crossing patterns because you don't have any time to get anything out wide. You can't do play action because they're crashing in on the sides. It was tough. And, I'm going to talk about this in a second, but I do think Will Howard had an excellent game in terms of taking what he was given by the Texas defense. He spread it around. Carnell Tate had, I think, 87 yards. But yeah, Texas has an excellent defense. And I thought, Chip Kelly called a pretty good game. It's just that they have, so many playmakers in so many spots that you can only really do so much. And if you don't hit on those early big passes, then it makes it a little more difficult to, try that later. Right. So
if Igbuka and Tate don't have, if they don't commit any drops in this game, Howard finishes his 8th game of the season with 80% or better completion percentage.
And there you go, which is nuts. I mean, that's completely nuts.
Now so he did play like a little bit of a wild ass.
He did.
he was throwing some crazy stuff, and that interception he had. We haven't gotten to the second half yet.
No. We'll talk about that.
The second half, we're all like, "Oh, there's bad Will," and he's been inviting it the whole game.
Yes.
That throw that he had to Guy Scott Jr. Where the ball was just going on a straight line to the safety, and then he comes from off screen and catches it in stride. I mean, full credit for that execution, but you want to talk about tempting fate.
Oh, I know.
That was when we pointed it out in Slack, Andy was like, I'm glad that it looked as crazy to you guys on TV as it did to us in the press box.
Now, what I will say is if that CJ Stroud threw that ball, we'd be like, hell yeah, CJ, you're the man. Because it's Will Howard.
No, I would be saying that. I would be like, that is some wild stuff that guy just tried.
We'll get to the second half and how it started, and there's a whole narrative around that. I do want to talk about, it's tied 7-7. Ewers kind of gets it going a little bit. They score with 30 seconds left in the half, and Ohio State gets it back, and you're like, all right, well, okay. I mean, I thought it was going to be a fight. I knew that this was going to be a close game. I thought Ohio State would just kind of pull away in the second half. I expected something like that. And then
there was a great picture of a fan on the broadcast after they scored that was just kind of doing like the 1,000-yard stare, even though the game was 7-7.
Yeah.
And it was so good that I had to rewind to get a picture of it. Just because I was like, this just encapsulates the Ohio State. This guy is literally like putting out like a look of being traumatized when the game is merely tied going in the half. And because I rewound to get that. I missed what happened next live, which was
a ridiculous 79 yards.
75. It was 75
yards screen. And okay, so what's wild about that play call, and they said this after the game, right?
Like I love running screens in that situation. I think more teams should
brilliant, do it. And it especially brilliant because you've got a mobile quarterback who can adjust to the blitz, which is what Texas did. I have no idea why they blitzed.
They didn't really blitz that hard, which is something Sark tried to excuse himself for in the post-game press conference. He was like, that Ohio State just executed that perfectly. He said we weren't really trying to get any pressure on them or anything. They just did exactly what they needed to do in order.
Well, they
to
hit
make
a
that
blitz,
play
but I think the problem was they overcommitted. The safety overcommitted when they were going after Will Howard and was like, oh crap, this guy's dropping back. I can nail him. But that's the way the play is designed. You're pulling dudes into the backfield. Will Howard drops back about 10 yards, which, by the way, I've heard some people say like, oh, well, you got to take away that fluky pass. I'm like, no, that pass only works because Will Howard's mobile enough and accurate enough to drop
Kyle
back 10 yards.
McCord's not making that play.
No, he's not. A lot of quarterbacks are making that play. And so he drops back. He flips the ball out to Travion Henderson. And the thing that I thought was really wild about this is that if you go back to the 66-yard touchdown run that he had against Oregon, it is almost exactly the same. Now, obviously, one's a pass and one's a run. But what he does is he sees a defender, he plants his left foot and slides to the right and then just takes off like a jet. And that's exactly what happened here. It was unbelievable to watch. I mean, that guy looked like he was shot out of a can. As soon as he makes that cut, it was done. He had like maybe 4 or 5 defenders in front of him and they had no shot. So, more stuff like that, please. That honestly, I think that completely changed the tenor of the game. It felt like Texas was starting to get some momentum. They're going into halftime. They tied it up. Let's see what they do coming out of the half, blah, blah, blah. And that completely took the wind out of their sails. We talked a little bit last week about how important it is to have running backs that are fresh, right? That have been splitting carries and then have the fresh legs that maybe other running backs don't have at this point in the season. And like I said, man, it looked like Travion Henderson. It was like the first game. I mean, he just like a bolt out of hell. I mean, it was crazy.
We're going to get to, the other big play in this game here pretty shortly, I would imagine. But we ran a poll after the game just asking who was Ohio State's MVP. And I was frankly shocked that 80%, almost 80% of the like 6,000 people that voted or something said it was Jack Sawyer, because Travion Henderson was my MVP of this game.
He was
largely
great
because of that play. Ohio State could have won this game without Jack Sawyer, because frankly, Jack Sawyer had done almost nothing until the final 2.5 minutes of the game, if we're being totally honest. Travion Henderson, that
JTT
touchdown
actually was probably the best defensive lineman until the fourth quarter.
In terms of a complete performance, I think I would agree with that. Yeah. But Travion had a much more complete game, and Ohio State could not have won this game and would have had a completely different approach and feel to this game, both going into and coming out of halftime, if he doesn't make that play.
Yeah.
Right before the end of the first half. And he had several other big plays too, and he finished the game with, I think, over 100 total yards of offense. So again, it's one of those games where it's like he's getting like 10 or less touches, and he's still, just because he's averaging
like everything
he's averaging a first down every time he touches the ball.
Right.
So he's just being remarkably efficient, and he was my MVP of the game. And I think a lot of people were just prisoners of the moment because of what happened at the end. But I can understand why. But Ohio State still could have won even if that play hadn't happened. I don't think the same is true if you don't have the kind of performance that Henderson did.
Yeah. If I'm giving out an MVP, I think it would be to Will Howard. But I think in general, like, there were a lot of guys who made this happen. And like, like you just said, man, every time Henderson gets the ball, you gotta be on your toes as a defense, because he can, that's exactly what, the ESPN play-by-play. Who am I trying to? I want to say Reese Davis, not Reese Davis.
No.
Anyway, the thing that he was pointing out immediately was that this guy gets the ball, he can house it at any time. And that's exactly what happened. So that was fantastic. Coming out of the half, Howard, Will Howard's getting a little too confident. He tries to
force, too saucy.
Well, and he tries to force the ball to Jeremiah Smith, and I think probably at halftime they're like, we got to get this guy involved. We got to start, stretching the field a little bit. And Will Howard ignored an open Emeka Egbuka.
Oh, it was that killed me when they showed the replay, and it's like, dude, like you just take what they're giving you, man. They've already they've made it ifs, ands, or buts about it that we're going to be we're taking this guy away from you, and it goes back to kind of what I mentioned last week relative to what Oregon's approach was, where it's like. It's a similar thing to like when you're watching a team try to guard LeBron James in basketball. Mm-hmm. It's like, we're either going to let you get whatever you want and we're going to take away the rest of your teammates, or we're going to overcommit to stopping you and make the other guys beat us. Right. Oregon said, we're going to make the other guys beat us. And Jeremiah Smith took him behind the woodshed because of it. Texas said, that's not the way to beat this team.
Right.
So we're going to take Jeremiah Smith out of the equation,
and we're going to force the other guys to beat us.
And Howard, for most of the afternoon or evening, did what was right and took what the defense gave him in terms of just peppering the ball to Egbuka and Tate and even Guy Scott Jr. This was the first game, and I talked about this in three key stats after the game. This was the first game since the CFP semifinal lost against Georgia, where 3 Ohio State pass catchers caught 5 or more passes each. And in the case of Carnell Tate and Guy Scott Jr., they both set career highs in receptions. Tate had 7, Scott had 5, and Egbuka had 5. So they all stepped up when they needed to and filled the vacuum that was left by Jeremiah Smith being taken out of the game. And they all played well
briefly.
For it. But Howard was like, I just got to force the ball here to Smith because I'm getting frustrated.
Right. The sexy Rexy, the Rex Grossman part of his brain, which does exist.
Unleash the dragon.
That's
baby.
Right,
That's
which does exist. Popped out for a second and was like, you got to get it to a freaking Jeremiah Smith. He hasn't got these passes. You got to. And so he throws it into triple coverage. He gets intercepted. Doesn't end up mattering at all, which that was actually, I think, the moment I was really tense at that point. I was like, oh my God, here we go.
Yeah. Well, Bad Will was tempting fate all evening, and then it's like, there it is. We all saw it coming.
Right. And I was like, okay, is this going to continue for us? But then, Ohio State, I don't know if it's a 3 and out that they forced, but Texas got off the field quick. It wasn't, they made nothing out of that. And I was like, okay, the defense is on one right now, and Texas is going to have to try really hard to generate points.
I can't believe that Sark threw as much of a fit over not getting a targeting call on Sonny Styles as he did relative to how the game against Arizona State ended. It was like, that is the most blatant hypocrisy I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. And speaking of like quarterbacks kind of taking when they were given, I mean, Ohio State's plan was essentially the same thing, right? Because you were forcing Quinn Ewers to keep everything short. That most of his passes, his completed passes, were to running backs. I think like 11 of his completions were to his running backs. It hurt them that Matthew Golden was out, right? Because he's definitely like one of their big play guys. But he really had to rely on those short to intermediate passes to Blue and Wisner, and they were, to their credit, they were great. I mean, they were fantastic. They were making lemonade out of lemons a lot of the time. I will say
that no look underhanded shovel pass on like 3rd and long,
and I knew they were scoring on that drive because like it was inevitable. Like you were like, okay, well then they're just. They're blessed on this particular series, and so they're just going to do it. I think that a lot of people are saying, "Oh, it wasn't really it was a pass." I'm sorry, guys. I don't think he was down. I think that was completed.
It was about as close as you can get.
It was super close, but
I think
it looked good to
me.
The
ball started to come out as his knee was coming down. It wasn't all the way in his hands. So
I would honestly,
tie goes to the runner, I guess.
Yeah, and honestly, like if it was an Ohio State, quarterback, and I would have been so pissed if they had called that, and it like him being down or something like that. I think you have to give it to the quarterback at that point because that was ridiculous. And that
I wasn't upset about it.
No, and it ended up extending the drive. They tie it, but I will say this: so Denzel Burke was sidelined for most of the game because of an upper body injury, possibly like a shoulder or something like that. Jermaine Matthews comes in and plays super well. Basically I think they had one completed pass on him the entire game. Like, he was awesome. And one thing that I've seen kind of in the analysis of this is that they actually like Matthews sometimes for like blitz packages because he's, maybe a better run kind of defender. He can come up quicker than Burke can, but he was great. He was fantastic. But now it's a tie game. Okay. So it's 14-14. It's the fourth quarter. You have to have a statement drive. And it's crazy. And you talked about it a little bit earlier, right? With, what Jack Sawyer did, kind of overshadowing a lot of things. Man, that drive in the fourth quarter to go up 21-14, that's got to be the biggest part of the game. That was the time where they had to get a touchdown. And not only did they get a touchdown, I don't even think they got into like a third or down or worse until they were in the red zone. And then they had to, convert that 4th and 2, which again, Will Howard coming up huge with that. I mean, they essentially ran a Dave play, right? Where they just pulled a guard and Will Howard ran behind him. And went for 18 yards and that was it. And I was like, all right, blouses. I mean, at that point I was super confident Ohio State was winning this game.
I mean, I felt like they still had to execute on defense to get it done because, it's like,
but they've been doing it all night. You know what I mean?
They let them score and then this game goes to overtime. There's a whole bunch of random stuff that can happen. You never know. Sure. But I was never like in despair that they were going to let the game get away from them. I was curious to see how they were going to execute or if they were going to have the defense bail them out entirely.
Well,
and my biggest criticism of Ryan Day, other than, throwing a fit over not being able to beat Michigan, has been it's really, really hard for me to trust Day to not only make his own correct decisions, but then have the team in a position to execute in close games in order to go out and win the game. And this fourth quarter was a big statement towards defeating that narrative.
Yeah.
13 play, 83-yard drive to go ahead in the fourth quarter. That is a very, very big deal. And, you can't put those together in crunch time unless you have a team that is prepared to execute well, particularly against what is probably the best overall defense you have played against all season.
I think definitely the best overall.
Big statements made, particularly given the team that they're going to play next, which has an exceptional defense in its own right.
And here's why I would say I would give the MVP to Will Howard, because that drive was entirely him, right? It was Will Howard, pass incomplete to Emeka, but he got, pass interference on it. Complete to Scott, complete to Tate, missed one to Emeka, complete to Quinshon Judkins, incomplete to Carnell Tate, complete to Judkins. Then they have the false start at the 41. We're like, oh my God. And then Scott, gets that incredible second effort to get them to 4th and 2 when it was like a 3rd and 9 and they got him to 4th and 2 and they almost had him down like 5 yards short, which would have been tough. But then Will Howard runs for 18, like again, and then he has that pass to Emeka to get him down, and within the 10-yard line. So my point is that that was Will Howard's drive. Like, that was him, like just being nails and locking it down and doing exactly what he needed to do as a quarterback. None of those passes, by the way, are to Jeremiah Smith, right? Only one is completed to Emeka. Everybody else is getting involved on this. It's a tight end thing. It's a running backs thing. And that's a sign of a quarterback that is locked in. So that was sick. They go up. And then obviously,
real quick, what I'm going to be curious to see for the Notre Dame game is they have now established that in the second half on 4th and short, if they're going for it, it's going to be QB power for Will Howard.
Yeah, they've done that multiple times this season. Yeah.
Well, it was a big thing against Penn State, and then we had been calling for it like the whole. We're like, why is Ewers running the ball more than Howard is? Like Howard's 6'5", he's a tank. We need to see this guy running the ball more. And then we got it on 4th and short in that situation. We're like,
oh
my God, finally. Yeah. What I would love to see against Notre Dame is if they're in that situation again, and now it's on tape over multiple games, well documented. It's like, oh, everybody in the stadium knows who's getting the ball in this situation.
Right.
You go the play action.
That's
power,
right.
Where you just got Howard
and you
dipping in like he's going to go.
That's
and
right.
Then you got
and you bomb it.
Friggin' Kasmerick streaking through the middle of the defense.
By the way, I need to talk to Kyle Jones about this. And by the way, people who listen or watch this, if you haven't been watching, now I say this like we get more views on our thing than Jones does. But if you haven't been watching Kyle Jones breakdown, like the X's and O's breakdown, they are so good. They are so good. And really great for like improving your education and understanding of the game. I want to ask him about Kasmerick because it feels like this team runs the ball better when he's in. They have better protection on the line and long, like developing pass plays. I think low key, he is a really important guy for this team. And I'm curious to see what he thinks his impact is. But anyway, they get the touchdown. They're up. Ewers, for his part, I mean, they have 2 long completions and they're right in it, right? So they're right in the red zone. It takes them basically like 20 seconds to come back and counterpunch. Couple pass interferences, and all of a sudden you've got 1st and goal from the 1 yard line. And you know who loves being in that position? Ohio State.
James Franklin.
Yeah, that's right. James Franklin. Yes. No. Tyleik
Williams.
Yeah, I know. But I'm just saying Tyleik, Jack, JTT, these guys, Caden, these dudes love doing that. They love the idea that you are going to try to run right at their faces and get a yard, and they can just say no. And that's what happened on 1st down. And I think that scared the crap out of Sark. He has seen the Penn State film. He knows what happens when you try to run to their faces 4 times in a row. And he was like, no, I'm smarter than that. I'm not going to be stupid. And so they do that stupid little like toss that, oh crap, Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs exist, and that goes for a 7-yard loss.
Which was really crazy because there was a game against Oklahoma. I think it was their game against Oklahoma earlier this season.
And they tried to run right at Oklahoma.
Not only that, they ended up getting stopped on the 1 with 1st and goal from the 1.
Yep.
But not actually, I think this was they beat Oklahoma 34-3.
Yeah, but
so I don't think it was this
season.
I think it was last season.
Yes.
But on 2nd and goal from the 1, they ran a toss to the right.
That's right.
And got stopped.
Yes.
So this is a well-established trend, based off of 2 data points. This is a well-established trend.
That's all that matters for
Sark, that he loves running these toss plays to Texas's detriment on 2nd and goal. So it was very funny to see the Oklahoma fans we knew who this guy was after the game.
And Sark said after the game, he was like, look, if they block that correctly, it's a touchdown. I'm like, I don't know about that. Because you've got 2 safeties in Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom who can diagnose plays faster.
It's one of those
anybody.
Things where it's like, in principle, I can understand where you're coming from, and I agree. But in practice, you're playing against Caleb Downs. Be
you're
real.
Playing against the best safeties in the country. Like they're going to see what's happening immediately, and they did. And that was the thing. Even if Downs was the first guy to hit him, but if he had missed, I mean, Lathan's right there. So there's no way that play was going anywhere. The next play they throw, the ball gets tipped and it just kind of dies in the end zone. It's like, okay, whatever. And then you have the play that I think is going to define this game. And if Ohio State wins their next game, probably the whole season, frankly. And that's Jack Sawyer destroying the right tackle for Texas, strip sacking Quinn Ewers, and then picking up the ball and running 83 yards to freedom. So, I mean, Jack Sawyer, I thought Jack Sawyer had a decent, he was blowing, he was putting a lot of pressure on guys, but he didn't have as good a game, I think, as JTT had.
I think he might have had 1, maybe 2 pass breakups earlier in the game.
That's actually
but otherwise he hadn't really gotten into the stat sheet at all. Right. He had like no tackles prior to that.
Yeah. But then he shows up in the biggest moment, and it is, it's over. That's it. And
that was the first turnover they forced in the whole playoff.
Yeah.
And it couldn't have come at a better time.
Not only that, it's the longest fumble return for a touchdown in Ohio State history. So that's kind of wild. It was just enormously cathartic moment. Because I honestly thought, I was like, all right, Will Howard's going to have to do a game-winning drive here. Like that's what you're going to have to do. We're going to fielding, golden boy fielding. Let's go. Let's get it done.
Not only that, it really is one of the most poetic plays in Ohio State history.
Oh yeah.
Not only because of, the roommate thing on its face is just unbelievable. Right. And but everybody was pointing that out from the beginning. The thing that I think hasn't been harkened on as much in wake of the game is that we've been very, very blessed to see Sawyer like really come alive as the season has gotten into its later stages.
Mm-hmm.
But this was, again, another season in this guy's career where for most of it, a lot of people were really, really let down by his production.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And then going into the end of last season, the guy had a game that statistically was extremely comparable to the one that JT Tuimoloau had against Penn State 2 or 3 years ago.
Right.
In terms of nearly single-handedly wrecking the other team's offense and just being that much of a force. He really did that. Like he was plugging all the leaks in the dam that, they couldn't quite get over due to Lincoln Kienholz or, whatever other reason on offense against Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
They were in that game for the first 3 quarters because of Jack Sawyer. But nobody remembers that game because they lost and everybody just wants to push down and repress it. But then also they didn't have Marvin Harrison Jr. They didn't have Kyle McCord. They're the horses that had gotten them through the majority of the season at that point. They didn't get to compete for the goals they wanted. So that game just gets totally memory hold.
But it was one of the biggest performances of anybody in the past.
It was the best game Jack Sawyer had in his career up to that point, and nobody remembers it. And it happened in the Cotton Bowl. Last year's Cotton Bowl.
Right.
Then we get to the Michigan game, and he makes the biggest play of his entire career on another goal line stand for Ohio State.
And nobody wants to remember that one either.
And nobody remembers it because Ohio State lost that game too. Right. And the thing that more people, I don't know if more Ohio State fans remember what happened after the game than what Sawyer did during the game. But I do feel like the common college football fan remembers the fight after the game.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
More than they do Sawyer making that play on the goal line stand to keep the game within 1 score.
Right.
And Sawyer had the defining moment for Ohio State during that fight in terms of saying, no, F that, you're not going to plant the flag on our field, and taking the flag back. And ever since that moment, Sawyer has come alive down the stretch in a way that we've made the point that it feels like one of Sawyer or Tuimoloau show up in these games, and it's rare that we see both of them show up. And ever since that game, both of them have been showing up.
Yeah.
And he didn't show up as much in this game until the 4th quarter as he had against Tennessee and Oregon. But in the moment where Ohio State needed to stop Texas on 4th down, he makes a play that even renowned Buckeye hater Kirk Herbstreit had to admit was probably one of the top 3 plays in Ohio State football history since the 1970s.
Yeah.
And for it to be a guy like Sawyer through all the tumultuousness of his career, after the Cotton Bowl he had a year prior to this one, after the Michigan game he had only a little bit over a month prior to this, you wrap all of that up, and then on top of the fact that it was against his former roommate that spurned the team, I really struggle to think of a play more poetic than that one.
It's awesome that he gets the recognition,
State.
right? And that he gets his flowers finally in a win for having that crazy, amazing play.
I feel like regardless of what happens against Notre Dame, like people have been complaining that we haven't really had a defensive end in the lineage of the Bosa brothers and Chase Young. Zach Harrison was supposed to be that next guy and never really lived up to that. And then for most of his career, particularly because they were both local Columbus area guys, Sawyer was getting compared to Harrison in terms of not living up to the standard of the Bosas and Young.
Right.
But I think after this postseason, Sawyer has elevated himself. I'm not saying that he is above in terms of the full body of work in their careers at Ohio State. I don't know if I'm prepared to put him above Young or above either of the Bosas.
Oh, sure.
But
no, I mean, yeah.
He is in that lineage now. He is closer to them than he is Zach Harrison at this point.
Oh, God. Not even. Yeah. And no, I don't think it's close.
That's a big thing that I don't think a lot of people expected that going into this season.
No, I don't think so either. I think a lot of people had viewed him as something of a disappointment, even with, Tuimoloau. I don't, and especially because they were perceived as not showing up at the same time. But both of those guys have been incredible during the playoff. I mean, Ohio State got 4 sacks on Ewers. This is the game after getting 8 sacks on Gabriel. I think they had 4 more on Iamaleava. Like, they are killing it, and it is crazy to see. And it's obviously, good news if, you're thinking about the Notre Dame game. A couple of takeaways I want to say about this. Texas, first of all, their defense, like I said earlier, they're legit. They caused issues all game. They played a really smart game. They did not play Ohio State straight up the way that Tennessee and Oregon did. They're like, screw that.
They gave Notre Dame a few pointers that I think they'll be able to use themselves.
We're going to talk about that. I think that's really interesting. We're going to talk about that. Like I said, Texas D-line got a ton of pressure. They have a great defensive line. They played very well. As we said, I thought Heyward had a super underrated game. He was just taking everything that Texas was giving. It wasn't huge plays, but he was, very judicious about how he spread the ball around. He kept Ohio State in the game. The thing that I want Ohio State to improve upon, I do think they need the running game back on track. I understand why they're passing so much because those receivers were so hot, but I want to see more. I want to see more creativity with how you employ Judkins, with how you deal with Henderson. Like I want to see more of that as opposed to having to lean so hard on Will Howard to make those kind of games.
I think it's easier said than done at this point.
It is. I
mean, given the injuries that they've dealt with, they have not had a good interior running game since before the Indiana game. And you know what? They have figured out it's very hard. I mean, one of my favorite football quotes ever, very, very basic. I think it used to get attributed to John Madden, but I think it's actually a different coach that said it originally before him. And I'm forgetting who said it first, but it's just very big. It's you cannot win if you cannot run, which is a very funny quote in this modern era of football where people love to glamorize the air raid and West Coast offense and whatnot.
Yeah, but I feel like if you can run, it makes everything so much easier.
It does.
You know what I mean? Like,
but if you don't have the personnel to do it, you shouldn't force a square peg into a round hole, which is what this team did against Michigan, and it's one of the main reasons why they lost.
Well,
they couldn't do it against Texas. They struggled to do it against Oregon. I don't think they had a lot of success doing it against Tennessee, and it wasn't even that good for them against Indiana.
No.
So, and they didn't have a good game running the ball in the interior in this game either.
Right. I mean, when you're missing your starting center, you're missing, your left tackle, you're missing, and the guy who was your starting guard is now playing left tackle and doing an incredible job at it, by the way. I mean, holy crap. What can you say about a guy who has allowed like 0 pressures, right?
Yeah.
Unbelievable stuff out of Donovan Jackson, but like, obviously their ability to run in the interior has been compromised through injury.
Most of the rushing success they've had during the playoff has been attacking the edges.
Right.
The best play Travion had against Texas, other than that, the screen pass was when he got the ball on an end around. And I mean, you want to talk about the guy's ability to change direction right now. I mean, he literally he strung together 4 cuts in a row where he made like 4 different defenders on Texas miss on his way to getting like a more than a 20-yard run. It was unbelievable.
Yeah,
like
he's bonkers.
And again, he only ran the ball. I think he had like maybe 6 carries for 42 yards in this game. They leaned on Judkins a lot more than I think they really needed to or should have.
Yeah.
But it's part of it is because they don't really feel comfortable getting the ball to Judkins on like off tackle or whatever. They're really just having him kind of plow ahead. When they have Henderson attacking the edge, that is where most of their success running the ball in the playoff has come from.
Right.
So if they are going to try to run the ball more, I would just hope that they focus on attacking those 2 areas of the field like they did against Oregon, because when they try to go up the middle in this game against Texas and in other games, it just hasn't been there. There's one game left. Go with the horses that got you here. Don't just try to force the issue.
I agree with that.
Reason than making it work.
No, I agree with that. And I'm saying they have to do the inside run game. I just want to see more effective running. And if you're just hitting the outside, if you're doing stuff like that, or even if they're like short little dump off passes, right, just to get them involved, or tunnel screens or whatever, that's fine. I just think you have to, especially, and again, I want to talk about Notre Dame in a second. We'll do Ask Us Anything. But Notre Dame presents a very interesting challenge because of the way they approach defense. And I think, I don't know if Notre Dame's going to try to do something different or not, but I do think there are avenues for Ohio State to make things very uncomfortable for the Fighting Irish. So we'll talk about that. Anyway, amazing victory comes on the heels of another amazing victory, which itself was preceded by an incredible victory. So far, I think this has just been an unbelievable run. I'm tired. I'm like, what? This last game's been played on freaking January.
You're gonna get tired. We're gonna be winning so much, Johnny. You're gonna be tired of winning.
Oh my God. Don't even give me that. Anyway, again, huge victory. Everybody's super happy. We're super excited, obviously, for the national championship, and there will be so much on 11 Warriors the next week or so here to talk about. Let's do Ask Us Anything. We have a number of questions for Ask Us Anything. We'll definitely get into them. Before we do that, we're going to remind you that the 11 Dubcast is sponsored by the dry goods store at 11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers, all kinds of great stuff. Check it out. We have been frantically trying to, first of all, restock the store, because I know all you guys want to get those silver bullet tees, which is fantastic. So we'll make sure those are in stock. We're going to try to have some cool new stuff, in the postseason. So just keep an eye on that. I think you guys will be happy with what results in the dry goods store. So drygoods.11warriors.com. Let's do Ask Us Anything. You can send us questions at Ask Us Anything to dubcast@11warriors.com. First one here is from Kevin, who says, guys, what would it take for football at Ohio State to be a dynasty like women's ice hockey? Well, they need to fire Ryan Day and hire, Muzzarall as head coach. And I think she could probably get everybody on the same page. No, I don't know, man. I don't know that you can be. A lot more teams, a lot more talent. It's more difficult. It's kind of crazy what Muzzarall has done because the state that program was in before she took over. But I also think that it's kind of apples and oranges. I mean, we're talking about some pretty, you need to have a lot of infrastructure to have that kind of dominance. But I do think that's what people want. They want Ohio State to be Alabama, right?
Yeah, but you can have all the infrastructure in the world. At the end of the day, what really makes you a dynasty is just titles. As someone that grew up a Chicago sports fan, I can speak to this with not only the Bulls, but also the Blackhawks, that the standard for a dynasty is very simple. Mm-hmm. You need 3 titles inside of 10 years. That's it. Yeah. They get 1 here.
That's the dynasty.
They're going to need 2 more because, unfortunately, we are now outside of the threshold, basically, where you would be able to count the one from 10 years ago from the first CFP. Yeah. If they had won in 2020 and then won this one, you could have made a case that there's a continuation dynasty over the last, like the back half of the last decade and the front half of this one. But they're going to need to win at least 2 more after this in order for there to be a Ryan Day dynasty. I would say the prognosis is very good, but only time will tell.
Yeah. Next one here, this is from Eric. Heck of a game in Pasadena. My neighbor came over and surprised me with Rose Bowl tickets during the third quarter of the game versus Tennessee. Long story short,
what's the name of the person that
I was going to say, Yeah. Is there any like, available, houses in your neighborhood? Is your neighbor like?
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say is that I wish you well, whoever's writing in from Pasadena, that, I know my cousin had to evacuate Thousand Oaks. So
I don't know if he's in Pasadena. I think it's possible that he got the tickets, but he like flew out or something. I'm not exactly sure where he's.
Did they just write in anonymously? They didn't even give a name. His name's
Eric.
Eric. Got it. Okay.
Long story short, the granddaddy didn't disappoint. Ticking off that bucket list item had me thinking about the pageantry and the celebrity guests at the event. I don't really follow celebrities, but we ended up seeing LeVar Burton prior to the game. I didn't know LeVar Burton at the Rose Bowl. I feel like that should have been a story.
He must not live in California if he's not very engrossed in celebrity culture.
I guess not. Who is your favorite person you've seen at a game or had a chance to meet? I met
Johnny Ginter.
Yeah. Okay. I met James Earl Jones at Ohio State. That was pretty sick. I met Bob Dole once. That was an interesting interaction. Trying to think. James Earl Jones was really cool for me. That was pretty sweet.
You might find this amusing. I might get the name wrong, but I believe he is a Columbus guy.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Furyk.
Oh yeah, Jim Furyk,
the golfer.
Yeah, the golfer. Yeah,
he was my senior year. He was at the Michigan State game with his wife, which is the game they lost. With the kicker doing the windmill and everything. But the weather was miserable, and so he left early. But the one moment of joy that I had during that game was I was sitting with all my college buddies, and they're. We're the type of friend group where that meme about guys just sitting around in a circle naming a bunch of random athletes or whatever for their own.
Yeah.
This is that kind of friend group. So
Danny Graves.
Seeing Jim Furyk, to these guys, Jim Furyk is a legend. So
sure, yeah.
Furyk is trying not to be seen as he's leaving this game with his wife because he doesn't really want to be. And one of my friends already has him pegged. And as soon as Jim
Furyk,
as soon as Jim turns, and it's without like mistaking him, his visage, my buddy looks out to him and just goes, Jim. And Furyk just gives without really, he gives like a
that's pretty good.
Hello, yes, I am Jim Furyk. I am the iconic Jim Furyk.
Yeah, right.
And then streams out of the tunnel with his wife. So
that's pretty good.
I can't say I recall seeing any other celebrities at games, but that's probably the biggest one for me.
I did not see James Earl Jones at a game. I did see him at Ohio State though. He was giving a speech, and I got to do a meet and greet after, and it was pretty cool. Also, Eric says, is there a Lunatic Fringe Life members shirt or sticker in the works from the dry goods store? We've talked about it. We'll see. We'll see if it works out.
Herb Street might have that trademarked already.
Yeah, that's right. All right. This is from Matt in Minneapolis. As someone who's actually eaten Wolverine. Wow. That's amazing. I would not recommend it. It's incredibly lean. It's also gamey and tough. I would only eat it as a last resort.
Who's right? Is this Xavier Leggett that's writing to us? This
is Matt in Minneapolis. Okay. So I assume there's Wolverines in the general
vicinity. It's a traditional fur trapping state. I could see
yes, that's right.
Wolverine.
Yes. Anybody in Minneapolis, I just assume wears like a raccoon skin cap and like fur skin jackets and stuff. And
it's basically South Canada.
Yeah, that's all I know about it. This is from Joe 513. Hell yeah, 513. He says, "Is this real life? And
is this just fantasy?
Is this just fantasy?" And he sent me a screenshot of the game. Maybe people can tell me what this means. I'm not exactly sure what he's getting at with that part. I don't know.
There's no question, just a screenshot.
Yeah, it just says, I don't even have a question. I just want everyone to look at this. Oh, I know what that is. That was the touchdown pass that Quinn Ewers threw, and they had a defensive lineman on their running back to guard him. That was what that's what the defensive alignment called for, and it was very stupid because there was no way that he was going to keep up with that. So.
Nothing will ever be worse than Tough Borland.
Oh my God!
Up on Devontae Smith.
Good Lord, that
I went into that game resigned to. I was just like, people are saying this is one of the best Alabama teams ever, and it's like, I don't know if I want to believe that, but I mean, you don't have a wide receiver win the Heisman very often.
No,
I don't know if Mac Jones is as good as everybody paints him up to be, but I have no confidence that this Ohio State defense is going to respond well to this Alabama offense, so I don't expect them to win. So I'm not going to be upset regardless of what happens in this game. And then that happened. And that was like the one thing that could have tilted me, and it did. I was so furious after watching that. I was like, it still bothers me to this day.
You know what? Half the team was out with COVID. Sermon got hurt like on the first play of the game. I mean, whatever. At that point, I was like, put tough on everybody. I don't care.
Zach Harrison would have done a better job covering Devontae Smith than Tough Borland.
This is from a good friend, Alvin. Is anyone else disgusted that Harbaugh and CJ embraced after their wild card game? No, I'm not disgusted.
A little bit.
I'm not.
I would have loved to see Stroud be like...
Do like one of the fake handshakes? Like,
not even that. I wish he would have gone into the post game, and I wish somebody would have asked him about all of this relative to the allegations, and it would have given him.
CJ's not that kind of dude, though.
No, he's too classy. But you know what? For this my own selfish Michigan hating pride, I would have really, really appreciated him to be like, yeah. Not so good when you don't have Stallions, huh?
Should have been like everybody needs to go to 11 Warriors 4.
You and that fraud Minter, you poured it over here with you. Not too sharp when you don't have your spy master rolling around. Right. Hey, Harbaugh.
There you go.
But no, he's too classy for it. But you know what? At least they ran them out of the stadium. So
they did. And Stroud's had kind
of at the expense of Dobbins, tragically.
Sad.
And Joey.
These next two questions are actually kind of related. So this is from Jen and also from Eric. I don't know if it's the same Eric. I think it's a different Eric. Maybe it's the same Eric. I don't know.
There's only one Eric in the universe.
That's right. There's only one Jen, so we know who these people are.
We know there's only one Jen that listens to the Dubcast.
Well, yeah, I would probably think that's a pretty safe bet. So Eric says, where do you rank Jack Sawyer's scoop and score among the all-time great Ohio State Daggers? And by the way, he does not count 85 yards to the heart of the South as a dagger because
how can you not?
Because it was a huge play, but it was a ceiling thing. It wasn't a dagger. I don't know. That's his logic. I don't necessarily agree with it. I would say it's a dagger because a dagger is like when the other team's dead. And maybe because Alabama was still in it, right? Like they came back, they scored a touchdown. They had a chance to, tie the game at the end of the game. So maybe that's why, but I don't know.
What? It was more of a shiv through the heart of the South than a dagger it was through the heart of the South?
It was like tearing their Achilles. So the other contenders that he has is the Sackenberg, right? The walk-off Sackenberg that Bosa did on him, where they won the game on the Bosa sack.
That's not even comparable.
I don't think so because it's Penn State.
None of the if it's not a scoring play, it doesn't even compare to what Sawyer did.
Okay, well, Will Allen with a game-ending interception against Michigan in 2002. I think that's pretty big. I would put that pretty high up there.
I wouldn't put that above what Sawyer did.
Will Allen stuffing T.A. McClendon, 2003 North Carolina State. I'm going to say no because nobody cares about North Carolina State. And I know that they had Phillip Rivers and Plaxico Burress and all these. I don't care. I can't put that up there. It's not a big game. That was like at the beginning of the season. Tyvis Powell sealing it against Michigan in 2013 with an interception. No. Okay. Curtis Samuel, 2016 Michigan. Right. And we actually call that the Brooklyn Dagger. That's one of our shirts. David Boston Rose Bowl versus Arizona State. That was in the 90s, obviously. I remember watching that live. And then C. Grant versus Miami for the Natty, where they, pressured Dorsey and ended up winning the game. So where do you put that on the list? Jack Sawyer.
None of them compare. And in fact, so? the only one that I think, Curtis Samuel, yeah, but that was a little bit of a different context even. I mean, that's that an offensive felt inevitable play.
Because they were driving, right? Like I don't
know about inevitable, but it was overtime. Michigan didn't have an opportunity to respond at that point.
Right.
It's like that was a game-winning play. Like that play literally won. That play literally won the game.
Right.
So it's not quite the same in terms of being a dagger. It's like they they were going to have to do some kind of play to win the game. They were already in overtime, well into scoring position. It's not like a long play or whatever. I'm going to throw one more out there.
Okay.
Which until until Sawyer did this, frankly, I thought this was probably my favorite defensive touchdown in Ohio State history. And that is, I think it was either the 2004 or 2005 Penn State game, which was very, very close the entire game. And then they had, I think, 2 pick sixes in like the last 5 minutes of the game. And the first one, I believe, was Malcolm Jenkins. That I
was at that game.
I think that was a much better candidate for in terms of being a dagger. Because at that point when Jenkins did that, it's like, all right, it's done.
Yeah.
Game's over. Especially in a game that's been this, where points have been at a premium.
But can anything get any more done than a game-winning play? Like, I mean, that's it, right? Like,
no, but it's not, it just isn't the same feel. You know what I mean? Is when there's more, like, it's still in regulation at that point. At that point, it's in overtime. So there's a sudden death element that there really isn't with the other game.
Different momentum.
Yeah, and they're not as long of plays either, because you're in overtime and you're already basically in the red zone at that
That's
point.
true. There is something special about those like crazy long plays, right? Like for a touchdown.
And it wasn't even the most emotionally charged part of that drive for both fan bases, because the spot was good, what the Michigan fans remember. For at that point, once they had already gotten the ball converted, they were emotionally spent because they were just more upset about that.
Right. Yeah, they were
I feel like they're less upset about what Curtis Samuel did after than that was.
I would say, I mean, I think this is pretty high up there. The Sackenberg thing, the Sackenberg, I think, was one of the funniest ones, just because I didn't think Penn State was going to win anyway, and I just was like, that's a hilarious way to lose.
Yeah, I can agree with
that. I will say, I mean, I watched that Rose Bowl live in the mid '90s, and again, that's back when the Rose Bowl was like, there isn't a national championship game, right? And this was a huge game for Ohio State to be in the Rose Bowl, to be playing a really like hot team like Arizona State that a lot of people thought should have been like, one of the best teams, like the number 1 team in the country. For them to respond to Jake the Snake, Jake Plummer going in and scoring that go-ahead touchdown, and for them to just drive straight down the field and then hit that. I actually remember my dad, I was like 10 or 11 years old. My dad was like, I'll bet you $5 Ohio State loses. And I was like, no bet. Because I was so freaked out and nervous. This was the first time I'd ever been that emotionally invested in an Ohio State football game. And for them to go down the field and win that game, that was, I mean, unbelievable. And especially in the 90s, when you've got this long, sequence of John Cooper teams losing to Michigan, blowing it in bowl games. You're like, oh my God, they're not. I mean, here we go again. And then they win the biggest bowl game that you can win at that time if you're a Big Ten team. I put that really high up there. I think this one, Ohio State goes on and wins the national championship. It'll be remembered in the same.
It's the defining play of the season if they 100% win the title.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. Now, Jen asks, what was our reactions when that happened? So like, how are we personally?
My jaw hit the floor with a smile on my face.
Oh my God.
It was great.
Yeah.
But then again, as soon as he got in the end zone, it's like, okay, I'm going to have to go write this up and then do the post-game I can't even
enjoy it.
I couldn't. I was like, they've won. Now I got to go do a bunch of work.
Right.
So,
No,
this is the sacrifice that we put in as the guardians of truth.
Weep not for
the
sports writer. I was
exactly right.
I was sitting on the couch, and my wife was trying to stay up, but she was like, it's really hard for her to like stay up in these late games, and she was like, no, I'm going to stay up, I'm going to watch it. And then as soon as she put the blanket on, I was like, okay, you're going to sleep. And so I didn't want to like scream, because I didn't want to like wake up either her or my kid. And so I'm just like containing it. I was like, and they win
constipated
the game.
with
I know,
joy.
yeah. I was constipated with excitement. And after they win the game, I'm doing my thing and I'm typing on Slack and I'm finding the tweets and doing all that stuff. And Courtney starts to kind of like stir, and I'm like, "You want to know who won?" And she's like, "Eh." And so I was like, I wanted an outlet to share my excitement with. And she was like half asleep, and I'm like, no, you have to watch this. And so like I rewound the DVR, and I was like, just watch what happens. And then when she saw that, she like woke up. She was like instantly like 100% awake.
Yeah.
So that was fun. It was cool to share that moment. I felt sad I couldn't share it in the moment, but it was late. I get it. So that was cool. It was really fun and pretty wild. Now that's Ask Us Anything. You can send again questions to dubcast11warriors.com. We do have to talk about Notre Dame a little bit. Now we've got Real Pod Wednesdays. We've got the Buckeye Show. All these other guys, they'll be talking about it too. Here's my 2 cents. Just kind of start off with, first of all, Notre Dame, Penn State. What a crappy game until the fourth quarter. I mean, people are afterwards.
I don't know, man. Colin Cowherd called it one of the 5 greatest college football games ever. Was it really that bad?
Him and I saw other people saying like, "Oh, this game was so good." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" These two
tough week for Fox Sports analysts, huh?
No kidding. 2 stupid teams just banging their heads into a brick wall for 3, and then the fourth quarter happened, and then they kind of figured out how to play football a little bit, and was
I
exciting.
Enjoyed it. It was a competitive game.
The end of the game was fantastic,
super aesthetically pleasing. But as somebody who's a renowned James Franklin hater, and seeing people, including people that we work with, saying, "Oh, Penn State's going to win this game by 3 scores after the first quarter," I was like, "Do you know who you're watching here?
Do you know who Frames is?
That's
this man will Janklin. The Frames Janklin will jank his way out of any.
The Janklining is happening right before
the Janklining.
us.
Yes, that's right. The Janklining is upon us. Penn State gave up 10 points in the final 5 minutes. Good job, guys. This is after a Notre Dame offense,
including probably, I would say that was the best offensive touchdown of the playoff.
It was unbelievable.
Watching that guy with Stonehouse something. I don't know what his last. It's a Great House. Something House.
Yeah.
Roadhouse. That's what I call it. Yeah, his name's Roadhouse. Yeah, watching Roadhouse burn both of those Penn State DB. And it was funny after that happened, you were like, wow, now I really hope Ohio State plays Penn State after watching that play.
Because the dude fell down. The Penn State corner was backpedaling.
Just thinking about what Jeremiah Smith would do to those 2 guys. It's like, I can understand.
So anyway, Notre Dame wins. Good for them. It's great to see Marcus Freeman be successful. Especially, people were dunking on them after they lost to Northern Illinois at the beginning of the season and then completely forgot they existed. I was telling everybody at the beginning of the playoffs that they were one of the most dangerous teams. Now they're in the national championship, and I'm not surprised.
I picked them to go to the title game.
Dude, and I didn't fill out
I also picked Oregon, but I did pick Notre Dame.
That's what I would have said, too. I would have said Oregon, Notre Dame. And, again, they were playing super well at the end of the season. This is a team that will inexplicably put up 50 points against, Army or whoever, and not a huge shock
against USC.
Against USC, yeah, but they also gave up, 550 yards of offense to USC. And then they'll shut down other teams. So the reason why, and I talked about this earlier, the reason why I think it's going to be an incredibly interesting game is because this is probably, I would say, amongst all of college football, a team that is dedicated to playing 0 or 1 coverage. They love playing man. They will play you straight up. And they're like, we got a great defensive line. We have really good corners. We're not doing anything fancy. We're not putting our safety super high. We're not.
You know who else used to love doing that? Kerry Coombs.
Yes.
And that worked out very well for Ohio State when they were playing far inferior talented teams.
Kerry Coombs was like, all right, well, we've got these great corners and we're just going to let them play man and play straight up. And that works until it doesn't.
Until you have to put tough Borland on Devontae Smith.
That's right. And so I am really, really curious to see how Notre Dame approaches this. If they try to do that same kind of stuff against Ohio State, they're going to lose by 3 or 4 touchdowns. I don't think they will. I think they'll be smarter than that. I think they'll get a little more creative. But it's going to be really interesting to see how they approach that.
We talked about this a bit pre-show, so I already know what you're going to say. But just for the sake of podcast banter, do you think that this is the worst team Ohio State has played in the playoff?
I think they're better than Tennessee. I don't think they're as good as Oregon or Texas. So, the line started at like 9.5. Now it's down to like 8. I still think that's kind of big. I think it should be maybe like 6 or 7. Notre Dame's good, man. Like, again, a lot of people are acting like this thing is predetermined, that Ohio State's got it in the bag. And I'm like, first of all, it's a national championship. Anything can happen. Second of all, Marcus Freeman's a great coach. Third of all, they have an excellent defense and generate a crap ton of turnovers. So if Will decides to get a little sexy Rexy with himself, that could lead to some issues.
And I think they have better special teams than Ohio State does too.
Yeah. So you're going to have to play a complete game. I think Ohio State's capable of that. I don't think Ohio State played their best game against Texas. If they brought their A+ game against Texas, I don't think that game's close. But I don't know that you can just waltz into Atlanta and be like, all right, we're going to win this thing. Like, you have to clean that up. And Ryan Day even acknowledged it after the game. Like, you can't have those penalties that you had. That will kill you. And so Notre Dame, they're justifiably the underdogs here. They're not as talented across the board as Ohio State. They, I think, play it on the knife's edge on defense sometimes against really good teams. And
you make a case as the worst quarterback Ohio State has faced in the playoff.
That is absolutely true. And honestly, it's probably the worst offensive line that they faced. They're dealing with injuries on offensive line. They just had a report out that I think their right guard is dealing with, like, he's got an issue. Their the right tackle's out, I think. They're going to have issues on offense. They're not going to be able to run the ball against Ohio State. I don't think that's going to happen. But again, if they turn this into a slugfest, if they turn this into a very short game where Ohio State only has 45, 50, offensive plays, anything can happen, man. And so, again, I think Ohio State's going to win this. It's going to be, I think, tighter than people expect, because Marcus Freeman's going to have those guys ready. He's a really good coach. And Notre Dame, you talk about Ohio State, like, wanting to get another championship. Notre Dame hasn't won one since, like, the early 90s. It's been a minute. So they're going to be chomping at the bit. And as Jeremiah Love, said, like, they want revenge. Like, they're motivated to pay Ohio State back for that last game. So I think this is going to be a tight one. And I want to see Ohio State pull it out and finish this narrative, right? Like, that has been flipped on its head since the Michigan game. But you got some work to get there. It's going to be tough.
I'm glad they drew Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's a better team than Penn State is. I mean, it's reflected by the game they just played. Yeah. But I also would not have been as interested in a rematch with Penn State as I am in a rematch with Notre Dame relative to both last season and the season prior to it.
Penn State would have been the funniest option, because you would have two Big Ten teams playing.
Yeah, I would have even enjoyed seeing Georgia more than Penn State, frankly.
God, yeah.
Either Notre Dame or Georgia would have been much more interesting games to me than Penn State would have been. So I am glad, even though I think Notre Dame was the best team of those three, I think it makes for the most compelling matchup of what could have been those potential three.
I agree.
I think you can make a case that this team is worse than Tennessee, frankly, just because they did not, I think, play. I mean, who was the best team that they played prior to the playoff? Was it Army?
No, Army was decent this year. They
were decent, but it's Army,
Yeah, right. No, I mean, that's a fair point.
And nobody will dispute that they had the easier path to this playoff, particularly with
easily.
Georgia losing Carson Beck, than what Ohio State had to deal with.
Right. I mean, honestly, I guess you could say that, like, I guess it would be Army, honestly. And that's a crazy thing to say. And they beat the crap out of Army. But yeah, I would say that maybe that's probably the best team that they've played.
You can make the case that Tennessee is worse, but I also think Tennessee was more tested. Now, Notre Dame absolutely earned their spot in the championship game. That's 100%. Indisputable. I'm just saying, relative to the last 3 games Ohio State has played, I think you can make a case that Notre Dame is the worst team of these 4 that Ohio State had to play on their way to the championship, which I think will make it very deflating if they somehow don't find a way to win this game. But I think because of how tested they have been the last 3 games and the fact that they've passed 2 of those 3 tests with flying colors, and even the most recent one in a very palatable and acceptable result, I'm frankly not very intimidated for whatever the result of this game ends up playing out as, even if it's a close game going into the 4th quarter.
Yeah.
I feel like in this moment, I'm willing to give Ryan Day a bit more benefit of the doubt than I was last week or even a month ago, just because of how they played down the stretch against Texas. I expect them to execute and go out and win this game and deliver the 9th national championship to Ohio State.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is going to be turnovers, honestly. I mean, Notre Dame, they're going to look for a way to equalize the offensive imbalance because Ohio State has a far better offense than Notre Dame does. And I think they're going to be looking for any way that they can to try to get the ball back.
It'll be turnovers and penalties.
Yeah.
In
the first half especially.
So crazy is, and especially is going to be penalties regardless, just because Ohio State at the moment is 134th out of 134 teams in the country in terms of
they're not going to get any
flags
calls
on opponents.
They're not going to get any calls.
I would be, I don't know when they started tracking that stat, but frankly, I would be shocked if they end up winning the title, if there's any other champion in the history of the sport that is anywhere close to last in the country in terms of flags thrown on opponents.
I will say, I think in general, like better teams get fewer flags. So I wouldn't be super shocked if it was like somewhat close to that. But,
dead last though.
Yeah, I know.
Dead last.
And it's like, it's by a decent margin. Like,
and we've talked about the trend with holding.
Yeah.
Like it would be great for narrative purposes because any time a fan that doesn't like Ohio says, "Oh, these Buckeyes, they always get the calls," you can just say, "Oh yeah, did they get the call is in the 2024 season?" Because guess what? Let me pull a little stat out for you that says they won the title and they had the least flags. Are you sure about that? I will be regurgitating that stat at anybody that'll listen for the rest of my life if they pull it off.
You know, a crazier way to put it, people are talking about, we said this last week, that Jack Sawyer hasn't drawn a holding call since 2021. The funnier way to think about it is not in terms of games, but in terms of snaps, right? So, like, think about how many hundreds of snaps, how many hundreds of times he's rushed the quarterback.
I did. That's why I've never been as shocked on this show as when you told me that it's been that long. I can't believe it.
So that's going to be really interesting. Obviously, we've got a little bit of time until that, so please, keep tuning into 11 Warriors for all the analysis that we have. I know Kyle Jones is going to be dropping something here soon if he hasn't already by the time we publish this. A couple other things just before we peace out. I know we've been for a little bit, but we got to mention this. All pros in the NFL, 2 notable names. Terry McLaurin, probably. I mean, I guess I'm, as a Bengals fan, I'm kind of obligated to not be all in on any particular Pittsburgh Steelers fan, but I love Cam Heyward. What a cool dude. And the fact that he's been like improving as he's gotten older, like even into his late 30s, is kind of incredible. But I love Terry McLaurin.
He had the same, hold on real quick. Heyward had the same amount of pass breakups this year as Patrick Surtain, who was heads and shoulders the best corner in the NFL this year. That's unbelievable.
Yeah. He's incredible.
That's unreal.
Yeah. And it's
a future Hall of Famer. No doubt.
God, he has to be in the Hall of Fame. I don't think there's any doubt at this point. But Terry McLaurin, man, Scary Terry, a guy that we kind of dumped on a little bit in his playing career at Ohio State, has...
Who's we?
Not me.
I loved him.
I'm saying we as the royal we, as like
Dubcast legend Terry McLaurin.
Yes. And I don't know if I've told this story. Terry McLaurin was on the Dubcast. Maybe I have told it because I think it's hilarious. But Terry McLaurin was on the Dubcast.
You've told me several times.
Okay, well, I'm telling the Dubcast listeners.
Yeah.
Terry McLaurin was on the Dubcast. Me and Bo Bishop interviewed him. He was incredibly gracious, funny, awesome. This is before the draft. And at the end of the interview, I was like, "Thanks, Terry. You're awesome." And then he's like, "See you guys." And then I realized I hadn't pushed the record button. So I like have to text this guy and be like, "Hey, man, I'm an idiot. This moron idiot internet guy needs you to come back on and talk to us again. Can you do that?" days before you're going to be drafted in the NFL. And he was like, yeah, that's cool. He was super chill. He's the nicest human being on the planet. He deserves all the success that he's having in the NFL. He's not just the nicest person on the planet because of that one interaction. There's tons of other stories about him.
And while we were recording this, he scored a go-ahead touchdown for the Commanders in the NFL playoffs tonight.
The dude, he delivers in the clutch. The Commanders are moving on. They beat the Buccaneers. So, good for him. That's awesome. And women's basketball, still undefeated. Got to mention that. I mean, they came back against Oregon and kept that alive. So good for them. I think 9th in the country. It's good news all around. So hopefully we can keep this rolling next week. We'll keep talking about it.
Real quick.
Oh, no,
just so the listeners aren't surprised. We're trying to work out what to do in terms of the release of next week's show. Yeah. So,
well, that's why we give you the extra long Dubcast and the preview here. We'll see what we do, with the Monday schedule.
Just for a quick peek behind the curtain, so you know how the sausage is made. We've been recording on Sunday nights,
right?
And then that gives me the opportunity to edit the show Monday night. Obviously, if we record on Sunday night next week and release it on Tuesday, the morning after the national championship, there's not going to be a lot of...
I don't know.
Right, exactly. There's not going to be a lot of value in that for you. Right. And then the game being on Monday night and us having work in the morning makes it a little bit tricky in terms. So we're still trying to work out with, our dearly beloved Real Pod Wednesdays, how we're going to space this out next week.
The next time you see us, we'll either be very sad or wearing party hats and going, that.
That's right. So. I'm just saying, if there's no show, we're not, committed to anything yet, but if the show isn't out at the time you normally expect it next Tuesday, just don't be surprised. Yes. But we're going to figure it out.
We'll figure it out. We'll be here to talk about it. We're excited. I think it'll be a fun time. But until then, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.